The 18-wheeler sat silent in the pre-dawn darkness, its chrome bumper reflecting the flickering neon of the truck stop diner. Inside the cab, Maya Santos stared at the crumpled envelope that had been sitting on her dashboard for 6 days. The return address smudged but still readable, Médecins Sans Frontières, Geneva. She'd driven from Phoenix to Dallas to Memphis, delivering everything from furniture to frozen goods, but she couldn't bring herself to open a simple letter. The paper felt heavier than any cargo she'd ever hauled. Before we jump back in, tell US where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya's calloused fingers traced the edge of the envelope while her coffee grew cold in the cup holder. Outside, other drivers moved between their rigs and the diner, their voices carrying across the parking lot in the comfortable rhythm of people who lived their lives on the road. She used to be one of them, back when conversation came easy and the future stretched ahead like an endless highway. Now she kept to herself, spoke only when spoken to, and counted the miles between destinations like a prisoner marking days on a cell wall. The letter had found her through 3 forwarding addresses and 2 trucking companies. Someone had been persistent, determined to track down Maya Santos, former logistics coordinator, current ghost. She knew what it contained without opening it, because she'd been running from this conversation for 18 months. Running from the questions she couldn't answer and the guilt that rode shotgun on every delivery. Before she could change her mind, Maya tore open the envelope. The handwriting was careful, precise, belonging to someone who chose their words deliberately. Miss Santos, my name is Dr. Elena Vasquez. I served with International Medical Relief in Zambara during the humanitarian crisis of 2023. Your colleague, Dr. James Chun, spoke of you often before his death. He said you were the only logistics coordinator who truly understood that medicine isn't cargo, it's hope on wheels. Maya's vision blurred. She hadn't heard James's name spoken aloud since the memorial service. She'd been too broken to attend. Dr. Chun had been more than a colleague. He'd been the closest thing to family she'd had since leaving home at 17, with nothing but a commercial driver's license and stubborn determination. They'd worked together for 3 years, delivering medical supplies to disaster zones and conflict areas where others feared to go. Before the convoy attack that took James's life, the letter continued, he made me promise to find you if anything happened to him. He said you blamed yourself for taking a different route that day, but he wanted you to know the truth. The alternate route you suggested saved 4 other vehicles and 37 medical personnel. His choice to take the primary route was his own, based on intelligence none of us had access to. He died protecting medicine that saved over 2,000 civilians in the refugee camps. Maya's hands shook as she read the final paragraph. There's a new crisis in Kurdistan, and we need someone with your skills. Not just your driving ability, but your understanding of what's at stake when medicine doesn't reach the people who need it. James believed you were the best logistics coordinator he'd ever worked with, and he said you'd find your way back when you were ready. I hope you're ready now. She folded the letter carefully and started the engine. The big diesel rumbled to life, vibrating through the cab with the promise of movement, of purpose. Maya had been hauling commercial freight for 18 months, but every load felt hollow compared to the weight of medical supplies that could mean the difference between life and death. She'd told herself she was done with that world, done with the responsibility and the constant awareness that every delay, every wrong turn, every mechanical failure could cost lives. But James's voice echoed in her memory, patient and encouraging, like it had been during their first delivery together to earthquake-ravaged Guatemala. Maya, you don't just drive trucks, you deliver miracles. Remember that when the road gets difficult. The truck stop faded in her mirrors as Maya headed toward the interstate. She wasn't sure where she was going yet, but for the first time in 18 months, she was moving toward something instead of away from it. Her CB radio crackled with the familiar chatter of drivers reporting road conditions and traffic delays. The sounds used to comfort her, but now they felt like echoes from a life that no longer fit. By noon, Maya found herself pulling into the parking lot of a medical supply warehouse in Little Rock, Arkansas. She hadn't planned the stop, hadn't made any conscious decision to come here, but her hands had turned the wheel almost without her realizing it. The building was nondescript, concrete and steel with loading docks, and the institutional efficiency of a place where important work happened without fanfare. She'd been sitting in the cab for 10 minutes when a woman in scrubs emerged from the building. Dr. Sarah. Kim looked exactly like her voice sounded over the radio during those desperate coordination calls in disaster zones. Competent, urgent. Tired in the way that came from caring too much for too long. Maya had worked with Sarah's organization before, during the hurricane season that had kept them both on the road for 6 weeks straight. Maya Santos? Sarah approached the truck with a mixture of surprise and something that looked like relief. "I heard you'd left the field. What brings you to Arkansas?" Maya climbed down from the cab, her boots hitting the asphalt with the solid sound of someone who'd spent most of her adult life around heavy machinery. "Got a letter about Kyrgyzstan. Thought I'd see what you knew about it." Sarah's expression grew serious. "It's bad, Maya, really bad. The conflict has cut off 3 major refugee camps from supply lines, and we're looking at a humanitarian catastrophe if we can't get medicine through. The problem is the route. It's 140 miles through territory controlled by different factions, and nobody's been able to guarantee safe passage." "What kind of medicine?" Maya asked, though she already knew the answer would make this personal. "Antibiotics, insulin, vaccines for the children. Basic supplies that keep people alive." Sarah paused, studying Maya's face. "We've lost 2 convoys already. Not destroyed, just turned back at checkpoints by groups who don't understand or don't care that medicine isn't a weapon." Maya looked past Sarah to the loading dock where workers were organizing supplies with the methodical efficiency of people who understood that organization saved lives. Boxes marked with red crosses and pharmaceutical labels, each one representing hope for someone who might not have tomorrow without it. It was the sight that had drawn her to this work in the first place, the tangible proof that logistics mattered, that moving things from where they were to where they needed to be was its own form of heroism. "Who's coordinating the delivery?" Maya asked. "That's the problem. We can't find anyone willing to take it on. The insurance companies won't cover it, the regular shipping companies won't touch it, and most of the relief organizations are stretched too thin with other crises." Sarah's voice carried the frustration of someone who'd spent weeks trying to solve an impossible problem. "We need someone who understands the terrain, who can navigate checkpoint politics, and who has the skills to improvise when things go wrong." Maya thought about James, about the way he'd trusted her to find solutions when the obvious routes were blocked. She thought about the refugee camps where children waited for medicine that might never come, and the families who would lose everything if someone didn't take the risk that others wouldn't take. "I'll need complete manifests, route maps, and contact information for anyone who's attempted this delivery before," Maya said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "And I'll need a truck rated for the terrain and equipped for emergency situations." Sarah's eyes widened. "Maya, are you saying you'll do it?" "I'm saying I'll look at the specifications and make a decision based on what's achievable." Maya paused, looking at the medical supplies again. "But if there's a way to get that medicine through, I'll find it." 2 hours later, Maya sat in Sarah's office, surrounded by maps, supply manifests, and reports from previous failed attempts. The route to the refugee camps in Kyrgyzstan looked like a maze designed by someone with a grudge against logistics coordinators. 3 separate checkpoint zones controlled by groups with different motivations, terrain that ranged from mountain passes to desert flats, and a political situation that changed faster than weather patterns. The first convoy tried to negotiate passage with each faction separately, Sarah explained, pointing to red X marks on the map. They spent 2 weeks in bureaucratic circles and never made it past the first checkpoint. The second convoy attempted to use existing trade routes, but they were designed for local traffic, not international relief supplies. Maya studied the timeline carefully. Both previous attempts had failed because they'd approached the problem like a standard shipping operation, following established protocols and hoping bureaucracy would yield to humanitarian need. But Maya had learned in her years with James that disaster zones and conflict areas operated by different rules, where flexibility mattered more than procedures and relationships mattered more than regulations. What about local contacts? Maya asked. People who actually live in these areas and understand how things really work. That's where it gets complicated, Sarah admitted. The official channels say there are no reliable local contacts, but off the record, we've heard rumors about independent drivers who know the territory. People who've been moving supplies through these areas for years, but they work outside the official aid networks. Maya felt something familiar stirring in her chest, the same instinct that had guided her through countless challenging deliveries with James. The official approach wasn't working because officials didn't understand the real problem. This wasn't about moving cargo through established channels. It was about building trust with people who had every reason to be suspicious of outsiders claiming to help. "I'll need 3 days to do reconnaissance," Maya said, already forming a plan. "And I'll need to do it alone, in my own truck, without any official markings or documentation that identifies me as part of a relief organization." Sarah looked alarmed. "Maya, that's incredibly dangerous. If something happens to you out there, we won't even know where to look." "If something happens to me following the official protocols, I'll just be another failed convoy," Maya replied. "But if I can establish real connections with the people who control these checkpoints, understand what they actually need and what they're afraid of, then maybe we can find a way through that doesn't depend on bureaucratic approval." Maya spent the evening preparing her truck for a journey that would either open a lifeline to desperate people or add her name to the list of drivers who'd tried and failed. She checked every system twice, loaded emergency supplies, and programmed backup routes into her GPS that might not exist on any official map. Most importantly, she removed every piece of identification that connected her to any relief organization or international aid group. For the next 3 days, she would just be Maya Santos, independent trucker, moving through territory where her reputation would matter more than her credentials. As she prepared to leave Little Rock, Maya looked at the letter from Dr. Vasquez. One more time. James had believed she would find her way back when she was ready, and maybe he'd been right. But this time, she wasn't just returning to the work she'd done before. She was stepping into something more challenging, more dangerous, and potentially more important than any delivery she'd ever attempted. The road ahead would test everything she'd learned about logistics, negotiation, and survival in places where the normal rules didn't apply. But for the first time since James's death, Maya felt like she was moving toward her purpose instead of away from her past. The border crossing into Kyrgyzstan felt like stepping through a curtain into a different world. Maya's truck rumbled past concrete barriers and razor wire while guards in mismatched uniforms scrutinized her commercial driving permits with the intensity of archaeologists examining ancient artifacts. She'd spent 2 days reaching this point, driving through 3 countries and learning the rhythm of checkpoints where patience mattered more than schedules. Purpose of visit? The guard's English carried the careful pronunciation of someone who'd learned the language from textbooks rather than conversation. Independent freight contractor, Maya replied, handing over documentation that identified her as a small-scale transporter looking for work opportunities. Heard there might be opportunities for drivers who aren't afraid of difficult terrain. The guard studied her face with the practiced assessment of someone who'd seen too many foreigners arrive with hidden agendas. Maya kept her expression neutral. Professional, the same look she'd worn at 1,000 truck stops and shipping offices. After several minutes that felt like hours, he stamped her papers and waved her through. The landscape beyond the border was a study in contrasts. Ancient villages with mud brick walls sat alongside modern refugee camps with gleaming white tents. Children played in the dust between buildings scarred by conflict, while women in colorful head wraps carried water, jugs along roads that alternated between smooth asphalt and crater-filled gravel. Maya drove slowly, not just because of the road conditions, but because she was mapping everything. Every checkpoint, every bridge, every place where a large convoy might face delays or difficulties. Her first real test came 15 miles inside. The border at a checkpoint manned by the Northern Coalition, one of the 3 factions controlling different sections of the route to the refugee camps. Unlike the official border crossing, this checkpoint felt improvised, urgent, staffed by fighters who looked barely old enough to drive, let alone carry the automatic weapons slung across their shoulders. "Stop the vehicle," commanded a young man with sergeant's stripes sewn onto a uniform that had seen better decades. "Open the cargo area for inspection." Maya climbed down from the cab and walked to the back of her trailer, moving slowly and keeping her hands visible. The truck was carrying a legitimate load of construction supplies destined for a town 50 miles ahead. Nothing that would raise suspicions, but also nothing that would require explanation if questioned. As the guards examined her cargo, Maya watched their procedures, noting which documents they checked carefully and which they barely glanced at. "You are American?" asked the sergeant, his tone suggesting this was either very good or very bad. "News, American driver, yes. Working independently." Maya kept her voice level, professional. "I transport materials for construction projects, equipment repairs, whatever needs moving." The sergeant exchanged glances with his subordinates, conducting a conversation in rapid dialect that Maya couldn't follow but whose tone she recognized. They were debating whether she represented opportunity or threat, whether her presence meant access to resources or increased scrutiny from authorities they preferred to avoid. "Many foreign organizations try to bring supplies through our territory," the sergeant said finally. "They come with large convoys, armed escorts, paperwork that takes days to verify. They treat us like obstacles instead of people who live here." Maya nodded, understanding beginning to crystallize. Large organizations have large problems. They have to follow protocols designed for people who've never been closer to a checkpoint than a conference room in Geneva. Something shifted in the sergeant's expression, a flicker of recognition that Maya understood more than her official status suggested. "You have worked in conflict zones before?" "Afghanistan, Somalia, Guatemala after the earthquake." "Always logistics, always focused on getting necessary supplies to people who need them." Maya paused, choosing her next words carefully. "I learned that the best route through complicated territory isn't usually the one drawn on a map by people who've never driven it." The sergeant studied her for a long moment, then made a decision that surprised his subordinates as much as it surprised Maya. "Follow my vehicle. There's someone you should meet." 20 minutes later, Maya found herself in a compound that served as both headquarters and community center for the Northern Coalition. The buildings were a mixture of permanent concrete structures and temporary additions that suggested an organization adapting to changing circumstances. Children played in a courtyard while adults conducted business with the purposeful efficiency of people managing limited resources. Commander Amira Kassim was not what Maya had expected. Where the media reports had described a ruthless warlord, Maya met a former university professor who'd taken up arms to protect her community when the government collapsed. Kassim's office was lined with engineering textbooks alongside military manuals, and she conducted their conversation with the analytical precision of someone solving complex equations. Sergeant Malik tells me you understand logistics in conflict. Zones, Qasim said, gesturing for Maya to sit across from her desk. He also tells me you claim to work independently, without the bureaucratic constraints that make most foreign aid ineffective. I claim to work efficiently, Maya replied. Bureaucracy is a luxury that people in emergency situations can't afford. Qasim smiled grimly. Exactly. We've had 17 different aid organizations approach us about transporting medical supplies to the refugee camps. 17 different sets of protocols, security requirements, and approval processes. Meanwhile, children in those camps are dying from diseases that could be cured with medicine sitting in warehouses 200 miles away. Maya felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This was the moment where theoretical planning became personal commitment, where logistics became life and death. What happened to the convoys that were attempted? The first one spent 3 weeks negotiating with our leadership, then another 2 weeks negotiating with the Eastern Alliance, then discovered that the Southern Collective had changed their checkpoint procedures during the negotiations. By the time they had approval from all 3 factions, their medical supplies were past expiration dates. Qasim pulled out a detailed map marked with colored zones. The second convoy tried to buy passage with cash payments, which created suspicion that they were smuggling weapons or funding opposition groups. Maya studied the map, noting the complexity of overlapping territorial boundaries and the strategic locations of checkpoints. Each faction controlled territory that included essential pieces of the route to the camps, making cooperation between groups that barely trusted each other absolutely necessary for any successful delivery. What would you need to guarantee safe passage? Maya asked. Trust, Qasim said immediately. Proof that the supplies are actually medicine, not weapons disguised as humanitarian aid. Assurance that the delivery won't be used as cover for intelligence gathering or military operations. Most importantly, recognition that we're not bandits or terrorists, but people trying to protect our communities in an impossible situation. Maya nodded, understanding the real challenge now. This wasn't about navigating checkpoints or negotiating passage fees. It was about building relationships with people who had every reason to be suspicious of foreign intentions, people who'd been betrayed by promises of help that never materialized or came with hidden costs. If I could arrange a delivery that addressed those concerns, would you be willing to escort it through your territory? Qasim leaned back in her chair, studying Maya with the intensity of someone making a decision that could affect hundreds of lives. You're not talking about a theoretical exercise, are you? You're talking about actually attempting this delivery. I'm talking about doing what needs to be done, Maya said simply. The children in those camps don't care about protocols or territorial disputes. They need medicine, and someone has to figure out how to get it to them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. For the first time since Maya had entered the office, Qasim's expression softened slightly. My daughter is in one of those camps. She's 8 years old, and she has diabetes. The insulin supplies ran out 2 weeks ago. She paused, looking at the map. If you can convince the other faction leaders that you're genuine, that this delivery is truly humanitarian and not political, then yes, we'll escort you through our territory. Maya felt something shift inside her chest, the same sensation she'd experienced when James had first explained why their work mattered more than regular freight deliveries. This wasn't just about logistics anymore. It was about a mother trying to save her daughter, a community trying to survive, people caught between political forces beyond their control who needed someone to take a risk that others wouldn't take. I'll need to meet with representatives from the other factions, Maya said. And I'll need to bring proof that the supplies are legitimate medical aid. That can be arranged. But understand the stakes involved. If you're discovered to be working with foreign intelligence, If the supplies contain anything other than medicine, if this delivery is used to justify military action against any of our territories, then you won't leave this region alive." Kasim's voice carried no threat, just the matter-of-fact statement of someone describing inevitable consequences. Maya thought about James, about the choice he'd made to take the dangerous route, because someone had to take the risk. She thought about Dr. Chun's voice telling her that medicine wasn't cargo, it was hope on wheels. Most of all, she thought about an 8-year-old girl in a refugee camp who needed insulin to survive. "I understand the stakes," Maya said. "Now let's figure out how to make this work." 3 days later, Maya sat in an abandoned school building that served as neutral territory for a meeting between representatives from all 3 factions. The room still contained children's desks and educational posters, reminders of the normal life that had existed here before conflict made education a luxury few could afford. Around a folding table sat the people who would determine whether medicine reached the refugee camps or remained locked in distant warehouses. Commander Kasim represented the Northern Coalition. Across from her sat Colonel Rahman of the Eastern Alliance, a career military officer whose uniform bore the faded patches of the former National Army. At the head of the table was Dr. Farid Nazari from the Southern Collective, a physician-turned-administrator who'd organized his faction around providing medical care to displaced populations. This American driver claimed she can transport medical supplies through all our territories without military escort, without official government approval, and without the bureaucratic delays that have prevented previous attempts, Dr. Nazari said, his tone suggesting deep skepticism. She also claims she can do this while respecting the sovereignty and security concerns of each faction. Colonel Rahman studied Maya with the professional assessment of someone who'd spent decades evaluating potential threats. "What makes you different from the others who've made similar promises?" Maya had prepared for this question during 3 sleepless nights in truck stop parking lots. "I'm different because I'm not promising anything except competent logistics. I'm not here to negotiate peace between your factions, broker political agreements, or solve the underlying conflicts that created this situation. I'm here to move medicine from where it is to where it needs to be, period." "And what do you want in return?" Colonel Rahman pressed. "Money? Political influence? Information about our operations? I want to sleep at night knowing that an 8-year-old girl has the insulin she needs to stay alive," Maya said, looking directly at Commander Kasim. "I want to honor the memory of a colleague who believed that logistics could save lives. And I want to prove that sometimes the simplest solutions work better than the most complicated ones." Dr. Nazari leaned forward. "What exactly are you proposing?" Maya pulled out a detailed plan she'd spent 3 days developing, based on everything she'd learned about the territory, the factions, and the specific challenges that had defeated previous attempts. Single truck, clearly marked medical supplies, full inventory available for inspection at any checkpoint. I drive alone, no escorts, no armed guards, no communication equipment that could be used for intelligence gathering. Each faction provides a liaison who rides with me through their territory, someone who can verify that I'm not deviating from the agreed route or making unauthorized stops. The 3 leaders exchanged glances, conducting rapid consultations in multiple languages that Maya couldn't follow but whose tone suggested intense debate. Finally, Dr. Nazari spoke for the group. "This proposal addresses many of our security concerns, but it creates new risks. If something happens to you in our territory, we'll be blamed by the international community. If the delivery fails, the refugee populations will lose faith in our ability to protect humanitarian operations. If the delivery succeeds," Maya replied, "it establishes a precedent that could save thousands of lives over the coming months. The medicine sitting in warehouses right now is just the beginning. There are supply chains that could be opened, relationships that could be built, systems that could be established to ensure regular deliveries instead of emergency interventions. Commander Kasim looked at her colleagues, then back at Maya. You understand that this is not just about driving a truck through checkpoints. You're asking us to trust you with our reputations, our relationships with our people, and our credibility with other factions. I'm asking you to trust that some risks are worth taking when children's lives are at stake, Maya said quietly. I'm asking you to believe that sometimes the best way to solve an impossible problem is to stop treating it as impossible. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of generators and the occasional voice from the compound outside. Maya could feel the weight of the decision hanging in the air, the moment when planning either became action or collapsed into another failed attempt. Dr. Nazari stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the landscape where refugee camps dotted the horizon like white flowers in a field of dust. If we agree to this, and if you succeed, it changes everything. It proves that cooperation between our factions is possible, that humanitarian aid can work without outside military intervention, that people in desperate situations don't have to wait for political solutions before receiving help. If we agree to this and you fail, Colonel Rahman added grimly, it proves that trust is a luxury we can't afford in wartime. Maya stood up as well, understanding that this was the moment of decision. Then let's make sure it doesn't fail. The 18-wheeler pulled away from the medical supply warehouse in Aleppo at exactly 040 hours, its refrigerated trailer loaded with 37,000 pounds of life-saving pharmaceuticals. Maya adjusted her mirrors and settled into the driver's seat, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility that came with carrying cargo that couldn't be replaced or delayed. Beside her sat Hassan al-Mousa, the Northern Coalition's designated liaison, a former logistics professor who understood both the political complexities of their route and the medical urgency of their mission. The first checkpoint is 12 kilometers ahead, Hassan said, checking his tablet where he'd mapped every stop they would encounter over the next 18 hours. Commander Kasim's advance team confirmed that Sergeant Malik will personally oversee the inspection. Maya nodded, maintaining the steady 40-kilometer-per-hour pace they'd agreed upon with all three factions. Speed wasn't the objective today. Precision was. Every timing mark had been calculated to ensure they arrived at each checkpoint during optimal conditions, when the guards were fresh and alert rather than tired and suspicious. The trailer's GPS tracker transmitted their location continuously to monitoring stations operated by all three factions, eliminating any possibility of unauthorized detours or unexplained delays. The landscape outside the windshield told the story of a region caught between war and peace. Olive groves and wheat fields stretched toward mountains that had witnessed centuries of conflict, while modern refugee camps created temporary cities where displaced families waited for circumstances beyond their control to change. Maya could see children playing between the white tents of Camp Halil in the distance, unaware that their future health might depend on the success of a single truck navigating territorial boundaries, drawn by forces they would never understand. You seem calmer than I expected, Hassan observed as they approached the first checkpoint. Most foreign drivers are visibly nervous when they encounter our security procedures. Nervous doesn't improve performance, Maya replied, slowing the truck as armed guards emerged from concrete barriers, painted in the Northern Coalition's distinctive blue and white stripes. Besides, I've been through enough checkpoints to know that confidence and cooperation work better than anxiety and resistance. Sergeant Malik personally conducted the inspection, examining the medical supplies with the thoroughness of someone who understood that his reputation depended on verifying every detail of their manifest. He checked expiration dates on insulin vials, confirmed the refrigeration temperature of vaccine supplies, and verified the digital seals that proved the cargo hadn't been tampered with during transport. Maya watched the process with professional appreciation, recognizing the difference between security theater and genuine protective protocols. Everything appears correct, Malik announced after 45 minutes of meticulous examination. The next checkpoint is Eastern Alliance territory, Their procedures are different, but Colonel Rahman's people have been informed of your arrival." Maya thanked him and prepared to continue, but Hassan touched her arm gently. "Wait, Malik has something else to say." The sergeant approached the driver's side window, his expression more personal than official. "My sister works as a nurse in Camp Halil. She told me about the children who need the medicine you're carrying. Whatever disagreements exist between our factions, whatever political complications make this delivery necessary, I want you to know that your cargo represents hope for families who have very little else. Then let's make sure it gets there." Maya said simply, understanding that this wasn't just a logistics operation anymore but a community effort that transcended political boundaries. The route between Northern Coalition and Eastern Alliance territory followed a mountain road that had been carved from solid rock decades earlier. Maya downshifted carefully, managing the truck's momentum through switchback curves while maintaining the precise schedule that kept them safely within authorized travel windows. The trailer's weight distribution required constant attention on the steep grades, but Maya had navigated more challenging terrain during hurricane relief operations in Central America. Hassan used the travel time to brief her on Eastern Alliance protocols, explaining the cultural expectations and security concerns that would shape their interaction with Colonel Rahman's forces. "The Eastern Alliance maintains more formal military procedures than the Northern Coalition," he explained. "They'll want to see official documentation for everything, and they'll conduct the inspection according to written protocols rather than practical assessment." The Eastern Alliance checkpoint materialized through mountain mist like a fortress guarding the entrance to another world. Concrete bunkers flanked the road while communications towers bristled with equipment that could monitor vehicle movements across 50 kilometers of territory. Guards in pressed uniforms approached the truck with parade ground precision, their procedures clearly rehearsed and rigorously maintained. "Documents for inspection," requested Lieutenant Yassin, accepting Maya's papers with the formal courtesy of someone conducting official business. "Purpose of transit through Eastern Alliance territory? Medical supply delivery to Camp Halil, Camp Nasser, and Camp Fairuz," Maya replied, matching his professional tone. "Full cargo manifest and faction liaison identification as agreed in the Trilateral Protocol." Lieutenant Yassin studied Hassan's credentials carefully, consulting a verification database on his mobile device before proceeding with the vehicle inspection. Maya climbed down from the cab and opened the trailer, exposing the carefully organized medical supplies to detailed scrutiny. Eastern Alliance inspectors used handheld scanners to verify pharmaceutical batch numbers, confirming that every item matched the pre-approved manifest and met international medical standards. "Insulin supplies for diabetes treatment," one inspector reported. "Antibiotics for infection control. Vaccines for preventable childhood diseases. All items appear legitimate and properly maintained." The inspection process required nearly 2 hours, but Maya appreciated the thoroughness rather than resenting the delay. These weren't bureaucratic obstacles designed to create frustration. They were security measures implemented by people who understood that trust had to be earned through verification rather than assumed through good intentions. When Lieutenant Yazin finally approved their passage, Maya felt confident that the Eastern Alliance had become genuinely invested in the success of their mission. "Colonel Rahman asked me to convey his personal appreciation for your professionalism," Lieutenant Yassin said as Maya prepared to continue. "He also wanted you to know that Eastern Alliance forces will monitor your progress through our territory and provide assistance if mechanical problems or other difficulties arise." The final segment of their journey entered Southern Collective Territory as afternoon shadows began lengthening across the refugee camps that were their ultimate destination. Maya could see Camp Halil ahead, its white tents organized in neat rows between medical facilities and food distribution centers. Children played soccer in dusty clearings while adults conducted the daily business of survival with dignity that impressed. Maya more than any military precision she'd witnessed at the checkpoints. Dr. Nazari met them personally at the Southern Collective Checkpoint, accompanied by medical personnel who would oversee the distribution of supplies to all 3 camps. Maya had expected another formal inspection, but instead found herself surrounded by doctors and nurses who understood exactly what each item in her trailer meant for the patients under their care. The insulin arrived just in time, Dr. Nazari said, his professional composure barely concealing emotional relief. We have 17 diabetic children in the camps, including Commander Qasim's daughter. 2 days ago, we didn't know how we would keep them alive through the end of this week. Maya watched medical personnel carefully transfer temperature-sensitive vaccines to portable refrigeration units, while other supplies were sorted according to urgency and distribution priority. The organized efficiency reminded her of emergency response operations she'd witnessed after natural disasters, but with the added weight of knowing that this medicine represented the difference between hope and despair for families who had already lost everything else. Dr. Vasquez in Geneva will want a full report on the delivery process, Hassan said, documenting the successful transfer of supplies with photographs and signed receipts. She's been coordinating with international relief organizations to establish regular supply channels based on the success of this pilot operation. Maya felt something shifting inside her chest as she realized the implications of what they'd accomplished. This wasn't just about delivering 1 truckload of medicine. It was about proving that cooperation between conflicting factions was possible when human need transcended political disagreement. The successful delivery established precedent for future operations, demonstrated that trust could be built through action rather than negotiation, and created a template that other relief organizations could follow. There's something else, Dr. Nazari said, approaching Maya as the last of the medical supplies disappeared into camp storage facilities. The success of this delivery has generated interest from other regions facing similar challenges. We've received inquiries from relief coordinators in South Sudan, Yemen, and Myanmar asking whether the protocols you developed here could be adapted to their situations. Maya looked across the refugee camps where children were already receiving medicine that had been trapped in distant warehouses just 18 hours earlier. She thought about James, about his belief that logistics could save lives when applied with skill and determination. She thought about the letter from Dr. Vasquez that had started this journey, and the realization that sometimes the most important cargo wasn't goods but hope itself. What exactly are they asking for? Maya said, though she already suspected. The answer would change the direction of her life in ways she hadn't anticipated. They want you to coordinate similar operations in other conflict zones, Dr. Nazari replied. Your success here proved that independent logistics coordination can work where traditional aid organizations fail. There are thousands of people in dozens of locations who need someone with your skills to bridge the gap between humanitarian intentions and practical delivery. Hassan added, Commander Qasim, Colonel Rahman, and Dr. Nazari have jointly recommended you to the International Relief Coordination Network as a specialist in conflict zone logistics. They're prepared to provide references and support for establishing a formal consulting practice focused on medical supply delivery in challenging territories. Maya walked to the edge of the camp where she could see families gathering for evening meals, children playing games that required no equipment except imagination, and adults maintaining hope in circumstances that would have defeated lesser spirits. The sight reminded her why she'd originally been drawn to humanitarian logistics, and why James had believed their work mattered more than traditional freight operations. I'll need a better truck, Maya said finally, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Something designed specifically for medical transport, with redundant refrigeration systems and communication equipment that works in remote locations. Dr. Nazari smiled. The successful delivery here has already attracted funding from 3 international foundations. They're prepared to provide equipment and operational support for expanding these services to other regions. Maya thought about her old life hauling commercial freight across American highways, the isolation and routine that had filled her days since James's death. Then she thought about Commander Kasim's daughter receiving insulin that might save her life, about medical professionals who could finally provide treatment instead of comfort, about families whose futures had been changed by 37,000 pounds of medicine delivered at exactly the right time. "Where do we start?" Maya asked. 6 months later, Maya stood beside her new truck in a staging area outside Khartoum, Sudan, preparing for her 7th mission with the independent medical logistics network that had grown from her successful delivery to the Kairistan refugee camps. The vehicle was purpose-built for humanitarian operations, equipped with satellite communication systems, redundant power supplies, and specialized storage compartments for different types of medical cargo. Her passenger seat was occupied by Dr. Amara Okafor, a Nigerian physician who served as regional coordinator for medical relief operations across sub-Saharan Africa. Together, they were preparing to transport antiretroviral medications to remote villages where HIV treatment had been interrupted by civil conflict, using protocols adapted from the successful Kairistan model. "The local faction leaders have agreed to safe passage," Dr. Okafor reported, reviewing messages from advance teams who'd spent 2 weeks building relationships with territorial controllers along their route. "They understand that this delivery serves their communities directly rather than advancing outside political interests." Maya checked her cargo manifest one final time, noting the careful temperature requirements and expiration dates that would determine whether their mission succeeded or failed. Each vial of medication represented hope for someone who might not have tomorrow without treatment, the same weight of responsibility that had driven her to excellence since returning to humanitarian logistics. Her satellite phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Vasquez in Geneva. Kairistan camps report 0 preventable deaths from treatable diseases over past 6 months. Model being implemented in 12 additional conflict zones. James would be proud. Maya looked at the small photograph she'd mounted on her dashboard, showing her and James standing beside their truck after a successful earthquake relief operation in Peru. His words echoed in her memory. "Maya, you don't just drive trucks. You deliver miracles. Remember that when the road gets difficult." She started the engine and felt the familiar weight of purpose settling into her bones. The road ahead led through territory controlled by 3 different armed groups, across desert conditions that would test both vehicle and driver, toward villages where children waited for medicine that could transform their futures. Maya Santos, formerly of Independent Freight Solutions, currently of the International Medical Logistics Network, shifted into gear and began another journey toward hope. Behind her, warehouses full of unused medical supplies waited for someone willing to take the risks that others wouldn't take. Ahead of her, families in desperate situations waited for proof that someone cared enough to deliver the miracle of modern medicine to places where miracles seemed impossible. The truck rolled forward into the African dawn, carrying 32,000 pounds of antiretroviral medications and carrying 32,000 pounds of antiretroviral medications and the accumulated weight of every life that depended on successful delivery. Maya had found her way back to the work that mattered, the calling that James had helped her discover and that Rachel's memory had inspired her to reclaim. She was no longer just a truck driver. She was hope on wheels, moving through a world that needed both medicine and the courage to deliver it where it mattered most. 2 years after the Kairistan delivery that changed everything, Maya received the phone call that would test every principle she'd developed about humanitarian logistics. Dr. Elena Vasquez's voice crackled through the satellite connection from Geneva, carrying the urgency that Maya had learned to associate with impossible situations requiring immediate solutions. "Maya, We have a crisis developing in the Caucasus region that requires your specific expertise, Dr. Vasquez said without preamble. A cholera outbreak has hit 3 refugee settlements in contested territory, and traditional aid channels are completely blocked by military operations. We're looking at a potential humanitarian catastrophe if medical supplies don't reach those settlements within 72 hours. Maya pulled her truck to the shoulder of the Ethiopian highway where she'd been delivering tuberculosis medications to remote clinics. Around her, the landscape stretched toward mountains that reminded her of the terrain where she'd first proven that independent logistics could succeed where institutional approaches failed. What's the political situation? 2 opposing military forces have established a blockade zone around the affected area. Neither side will guarantee safe passage for traditional aid convoys because they suspect humanitarian operations are being used for intelligence gathering or weapons smuggling. The settlements are caught in the middle with no access to clean water, sanitation facilities, or medical treatment. Maya felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, the same sensation she'd experienced when Commander Qasim had first described children dying while medicine sat unused in distant warehouses. How many people are we talking about? Approximately 15,000 refugees, including over 4,000 children under the age of 10. The cholera is spreading rapidly through unsanitary conditions, and without immediate intervention, we're looking at hundreds of preventable deaths within the next week. Dr. Vasquez paused, and Maya could hear the weight of institutional frustration in the silence. The UN Security Council is debating emergency resolutions. The International Red Cross is negotiating with both military commands, and every major relief organization has teams standing by with supplies. But nobody can get through the blockade, because nobody trusts that humanitarian aid isn't being used as cover for military operations. Maya understood the problem immediately. Large-scale relief operations required complex coordination, multiple vehicles, and extensive personnel. That made military commanders nervous about hidden agendas. The very infrastructure designed to ensure accountability and transparency made humanitarian aid appear suspicious to forces that viewed everything through the lens of warfare. What kind of medical supplies are needed? Maya asked, though she was already calculating route possibilities and vehicle requirements in her head. Oral rehydration salts, antibiotics for severe cases, water purification tablets, and basic sanitation supplies. Nothing complex, nothing that requires refrigeration, but absolutely critical for preventing mass casualties from a treatable disease. Maya thought about the principles that had guided her successful operations in Kyrgyzstan, Sudan, and 8 other conflict zones over the past 2 years. Single vehicle, minimal personnel, complete transparency about cargo contents, and direct engagement with local power structures rather than reliance on institutional negotiations. The approach that had worked in desert conditions and mountain territory might be applicable to the Caucasus, but the timeline created unprecedented pressure. I'll need complete intelligence on the military situation, contact information for field commanders on both sides, and staging area for supply preparation, Maya said, making the decision that would define her reputation in the international relief community. Also, I'll need someone from each opposing force to serve as liaison during transit through their territory. Maya, the risks involved in this operation are significantly higher than anything you've attempted before. Both military commands have explicitly stated that unauthorized vehicles in the blockade zone will be treated as hostile targets. There's no precedent for independent logistics coordination in active combat situations. Maya looked at the photograph on her dashboard, the image of her and James that had accompanied her through every dangerous delivery over the past 2 years. His voice echoed in her memory with the wisdom that had shaped her understanding of humanitarian work. The most important cargo isn't goods, it's hope. And hope requires someone willing to take risks that others won't take. Dr. Vasquez, 15,000 people don't have time for precedent, Maya replied. They need someone to deliver medicine before cholera delivers death. If that means creating new precedent, then that's what we'll do. 24 hours later, Maya stood in a military briefing room in Tbilisi, facing representatives from both opposing forces who had agreed to a temporary ceasefire for humanitarian purposes. General Dmitry Volkov represented the Northern Command, while Colonel Lila Nazarbayeva spoke for the Southern Alliance. The tension between them was palpable. Decades of ethnic and territorial conflict compressed into the space between their chairs. This American civilian claims she can transport medical supplies through our active combat zone without military escort, without armored vehicles, and without communication equipment that could be used for battlefield intelligence, General Volkov sighed, his tone suggesting deep skepticism about Maya's capabilities. Colonel Nazarbayeva consulted her tablet, reviewing intelligence reports about Maya's previous operations. Her record shows successful deliveries in 12 conflict zones, always with minimal personnel and maximum transparency. But this situation is different. We have active artillery positions, mobile infantry units, and air support operations that could mistake any unauthorized vehicle for an enemy target. Maya had prepared for this objection during the flight from Ethiopia to Georgia. General, Colonel, with respect, your military operations are designed to engage enemy forces, not civilian medical personnel. If I follow established protocols, maintain constant communication with both commands, and travel during designated humanitarian windows, the risk of mistaken targeting can be minimized. What protocols? General Volkov demanded. There are no established protocols for civilian vehicles in active combat zones. Then we'll establish them now, Maya replied, pulling out a detailed operational plan she developed during 18 hours of research and consultation with military advisors. Single truck, clearly marked with international medical symbols. GPS tracking visible to both commands. Predetermined route with scheduled checkpoint contacts every 30 minutes. Any deviation from the plan or loss of communication results in immediate mission abort. Colonel Nazarbayeva studied the route map carefully, noting the strategic implications of allowing any vehicle to traverse territory where both forces maintain sensitive positions. This route passes through 3 active engagement zones, where our forces have standing orders to interdict any unauthorized movement, which is why I need designated liaisons from both commands, Maya explained. Military personnel who can verify my authorization and coordinate with field units to ensure safe passage. This isn't about avoiding your security measures. It's about working within them to accomplish a humanitarian mission. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of helicopters and the electronic hum of communication equipment that connected this briefing room to military units scattered across hundreds of square kilometers of contested territory. Maya could feel the weight of decision hanging in the air, the moment when institutional caution either yielded to humanitarian necessity or condemned thousands of people to preventable suffering. General Volkov exchanged glances with Colonel Nazarbayeva, conducting a silent conversation that acknowledged their mutual suspicion while recognizing the political impossibility of being blamed for blocking medical aid to refugee settlements. If we authorize this operation and something goes wrong, if your vehicle is destroyed by enemy action or mistaken for a military target, the international consequences could escalate this conflict beyond our ability to control it. If you don't authorize this operation and children die from cholera while medicine sits unused in warehouses, the international consequences will be much worse, Maya replied quietly. Preventable humanitarian catastrophes create political pressure that makes military solutions more difficult, not easier. Colonel Nazarbayeva stood up and walked to the window overlooking the staging area where Maya's truck waited, loaded with medical supplies that could save thousands of lives if delivered successfully. You understand that we cannot guarantee your safety once you enter the combat zone. Artillery fire, airstrikes, small arms engagement, all of these could occur without warning or ability to provide protection. I understand that safety is never guaranteed in conflict zones, Maya said, joining her at the window. But I also understand that some risks are worth taking, when the alternative is watching people die from diseases that can be cured with medicine that's already available. The negotiations continued for 6 hours, with military lawyers consulting international humanitarian law while field commanders coordinated with units that would need to recognize and protect Maya's vehicle during transit. Finally, both sides agreed to a protocol that balanced security concerns with humanitarian necessity, creating a framework that could serve as precedent for future operations in active combat situations. 12-hour operational window, General Volkov announced. Departure at 0600 hours. Arrival at refugee settlements no later than 1800 hours. Immediate departure after supply delivery. Any delays or deviations from the scheduled timeline result in automatic mission termination and military escort to the nearest safe zone. Maya accepted the restrictions, understanding that rigid timing was the price of gaining access to territory where flexibility could be mistaken for hostile intent. The success of this operation would depend on precision logistics under combat conditions, the ultimate test of everything she'd learned about delivering hope to places where hope seemed impossible. As the military representatives finalized authorization documents, Maya called Dr. Vasquez to confirm that medical supplies were properly configured for rapid distribution upon arrival. Oral rehydration packets organized for immediate dispensing. Antibiotics sorted by dosage requirements. Water purification tablets with translated instructions for refugee population leaders. Everything designed for maximum efficiency during minimum exposure time. Maya, the international relief community is watching this operation very closely, Dr. Vasquez said. If you succeed, it proves that independent logistics coordination can work even in active combat situations. If you fail, it could set back humanitarian access negotiations for years. Maya looked at her truck, its medical symbols freshly painted and satellite communication equipment tested for the challenging conditions ahead. Dr. Vasquez, I didn't start doing this work to set precedents or prove points. I started doing it because children need medicine and someone has to be willing to deliver it. The political implications are secondary to the humanitarian necessity. At 0600 hours the following morning, Maya's truck rolled out of the staging area with military liaisons from both opposing forces monitoring her progress through secure communication channels. The early morning mist reminded her of mountain roads in Kyrgyzstan, where she'd first learned that trust could be built through action rather than negotiation. But this time, the stakes were higher, the timeline shorter, and the margin for error non-existent. The first checkpoint appeared through the mist like a fortress built from necessity rather than design. Soldiers emerged from concealed positions, their weapons trained on Maya's truck until radio confirmation verified her authorization and mission parameters. The inspection process was swift but thorough, military efficiency applied to humanitarian purpose with the urgency that came from operating in an active combat zone. Northern Command Checkpoint Alpha, medical transport authorized for transit, reported the checkpoint commander into his radio. Vehicle proceeding to coordinate designation Beta under established protocol. Maya continued through territory that showed the scars of prolonged conflict. Villages stood empty except for stray animals, while abandoned vehicles rusted beside roads cratered by artillery fire. The landscape told the story of civilians caught between military forces, people who'd been forced to choose between their homes and their lives. In the distance, she could see the refugee settlements where thousands of displaced families waited for medicine that would determine whether cholera became a manageable health crisis or a humanitarian catastrophe. The Southern Alliance checkpoint. materialized from behind camouflage barriers with the sudden appearance that characterized military positions designed for rapid deployment and withdrawal. Colonel Nazarbayeva's liaison officer conducted the inspection personally, verifying that Maya's cargo matched the pre-approved manifest and that her vehicle showed no signs of tampering or unauthorized equipment. Southern Alliance checkpoint. Confirmed. Medical transport proceeding to final destination, the liaison reported. Estimated arrival time consistent with authorized schedule. Maya could see the refugee settlements ahead, their temporary structures creating cities of necessity in landscapes never intended to support large populations. Smoke rose from cooking fires and waste disposal areas where sanitation systems struggled to accommodate thousands of people in spaces designed for hundreds. Children played in the dust between tents while adults conducted the daily business of survival with dignity that impressed Maya more than any military precision she'd witnessed. At the checkpoints, the settlement leaders were waiting when Maya arrived. Medical personnel who'd been organizing for rapid distribution since receiving word that supplies were finally reaching their community. Maya watched volunteers carefully unload oral rehydration packets while other supplies were sorted according to urgency and distribution priority. The organized efficiency reminded her of emergency response operations she'd witnessed after natural disasters, but with the added weight of knowing that this medicine represented the difference between hope and catastrophe for families who had already lost everything else. The cholera cases were increasing exponentially before your arrival, reported Dr. Anya Petrosian, the settlement's chief medical officer. We've been rationing our remaining supplies for the most severe cases, but we were facing impossible decisions about who to treat and who to comfort. These supplies change everything. Maya felt the familiar satisfaction that came from successful completion of a critical delivery, but this time the achievement carried broader implications. The successful transit through active combat conditions proved that humanitarian logistics could adapt to the most challenging circumstances, that medicine could reach desperate populations even when traditional aid channels were blocked by military necessity. Her satellite phone buzzed with a message from the International Relief Coordination Network headquarters. Caucasus operation successful. Cholera outbreak contained. Request immediate consultation on protocols for expansion to other active conflict zones. Congratulations on changing what's possible in humanitarian logistics. Maya looked across the refugee settlement where families were already receiving medicine that had been trapped in distant warehouses just 12 hours earlier. Children who'd been suffering from dehydration were getting treatment that would save their lives, while preventive measures would protect thousands of others from contracting a disease that thrived in unsanitary conditions. Dr. Petrosian, this delivery establishes precedent for regular supply operations even during active military conflict, Maya said, understanding that today's success was just the beginning of what could become a systematic approach to reaching populations trapped by warfare. If the medical needs continue, we can develop protocols for sustained delivery operations that work within military constraints rather than against them. Maya Santos had proven that sometimes the most important battles weren't fought with weapons, but with determination to deliver hope where hope seemed impossible. The road home led through territory that would soon become a model for humanitarian access in the world's most challenging conflict zones. 5 years after that first letter from Dr. Vasquez, Maya stood before the United Nations General Assembly, addressing world leaders about the revolution in humanitarian logistics that had grown from a single truck driver's willingness to take impossible risks. The assembly hall was packed with delegates from nations that had benefited from the protocol she'd developed. Countries where preventable diseases no longer claimed lives because medicine could reach even the most isolated populations. When I first drove through those checkpoints in Kyrgyzstan, I thought I was simply keeping a promise to a fallen colleague, Maya told the assembly, her voice carrying across the chamber where decisions affecting millions of lives were made daily. I didn't realize I was proving that compassion could overcome bureaucracy, that trust could be built through action rather than negotiation, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon against human suffering is simply the courage to deliver help where it's needed most. Behind her, a presentation screen showed statistics that told the story of transformation. Over 300 successful deliveries to conflict zones across 4 continents. More than 2 million people who'd received life-saving medical treatment. Because someone was willing to drive through territories others considered impassable. 0 mission failures, 0 security incidents, 0 preventable deaths from treatable diseases in communities served by the independent medical logistics network that had grown from Maya's pioneering efforts. The Secretary General rose to present Maya with the UN Humanitarian Excellence Award, but she was thinking about James, about the colleague whose belief in logistics as a force for good had started this journey. She was thinking about Commander Qasim's daughter, now healthy and attending school, thanks to insulin that had arrived exactly when hope seemed lost. Most of all, she was thinking about all the children playing in refugee camps tonight because someone had decided that some risks were worth taking when lives hung in the balance. Maya Santos had started as just a truck driver haunted by survivor's guilt and professional failure. She'd become proof that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they refused to accept that suffering was inevitable, that bureaucracy was insurmountable, or that hope was a luxury desperate people couldn't afford. The road ahead would bring new challenges, new conflicts, new populations trapped between political forces beyond their control. But Maya had learned that every impossible situation contained the seeds of its own solution, waiting for someone brave enough to plant them and persistent enough to see them grow into something that could save lives and restore faith in human compassion. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.